Hello, everyone, and welcome to the digestive system. To begin this section, we need to classify two types of digestion that we go through. The first is mechanical digestion. I want you to immediately think teeth, a very kind of physical way to break down food. So this is going to be crushing, grinding, and the churning of food. Again, I want you to think teeth, but this is also going to occur in your stomach. So make sure you know where these are occurring. Chemical digestion is, as the name implies, going to be through the usage of acids and enzymes to break down the molecular structures of foods. So as you can see from this little diagram over here to the right, it's going to break apart carbohydrate molecules. We're basically just going to kind of slice and dice them up by using acids and enzymes. Now, I know I said your teeth and your stomach are going to be used in mechanical digestion, but chemical digestion is going to start in your mouth. So this is going to be with saliva. Saliva is going to have enzymes that are going to start breaking down lipids and other molecules. The other places that you're going to see chemical digestion is going to be almost everywhere through the digestive system. So this includes the stomach. Obviously, we have gastric juices that are going to be very acidic to break down food molecules in your stomach. This is also going to occur in the intestines, both large and small. So there are still going to be some chemical digestions going on in the intestines. There are 6 basic functions for the digestive system. The first is ingestion, so this is going to be taking food into the mouth. Secretion, which is going to be the release of water, acid, buffers, and enzymes into the lumen. And if you need a little refresher on what the lumen is, if we have a tube, it is this empty space in the tube of the GI tract. Mixing and propulsion, this is going to be the churning and movement of food through the GI tract. So propulsion, we are going to talk about a little bit more when we talk about the stomach and the pyloric sphincter. Just kind of stay tuned for that one. Digestion is quite obviously one of the main functions of the digestive system, and this is the mechanical and chemical breakdown of food, what we were just talking about on the last slide. Absorption is going to be the passage of digested products from the GI tract into the blood and lymphatic vessels. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about the small intestine. And then last but not least, one of the functions is defecation, and this is just the elimination of feces or kind of product that you can't break down any further from what you ingest. Here's a nice diagram showing from start to finish how food is going to move through the digestive system. So starting with the mouth, obviously we are going to ingest food, which we are then going to start to crush or grind using our teeth. We are going to swallow, which remember that is deglutition, down into the esophagus. And do keep in mind that our salivary glands are going to be releasing enzymes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a moment. But just for now, just know that our salivary glands are going to start releasing enzymes as well as to lubricate the food that we are swallowing so that it can go down the esophagus a little bit easier. From the esophagus, we're going to pass through a sphincter, which is going to be a ring of muscle, and hop on into the stomach. In the stomach, there is going to be chemical and mechanical digestion that is going to be churning and breaking apart molecules, as well as making those particles of food a little bit smaller. Within the stomach, the food is going to stay there for a few hours thereabouts, kind of just moving around until it is small enough to go into the small intestine down here at the bottom of the stomach. It is going to pass through another sphincter. This is a very important sphincter, the pyloric sphincter, which is going to basically act as like a very tight little hole for food to be propelled out of. So it's going to come essentially squirting out of this sphincter into the small intestine. The small intestine is split into 3 parts, and we will talk about those in just a moment. So just kind of make a little note that there are 3 parts to the small intestine. From the small intestine, we are going to enter into the large intestine. And the large intestine is going to be this really big guy right here, coming up, under, and around your entire abdominal cavity. So this is where that small intestine is going to be going into the large intestine. The large intestine is going to be split up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I believe we're going to count this one 6 parts technically. So again, kind of stay tuned for what those are going to be, but just sort of keep in mind that there are 6 separate parts that also include the rectum. The anus is, in my mind, the way I think of it more is sort of just an exit. It's not really technically like a part of the large intestine. I mean, it is, but it is kind of just a hole that is going to be that exit from the body once all that food has been processed in some capacity and we've gotten all the nutrients we can out of it. There are certain things on here that I did not mention that you should make a little note about. I like to call these the accessory players. So they don't necessarily serve just digestive functions. We've talked about a few of these before. We've talked about the pancreas for sure when we were talking about the endocrine system. The pancreas is a gland, and it does serve very important functions in order to maintain your blood glucose levels. That is its digestive function, as well as an endocrine function. But the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas are all going to secrete various things in order to help digestion. And we'll talk about those a little bit more specifically here in just a little bit. The appendix, however, which is still kind of an accessory player, doesn't really serve too much of a function anymore. It is a vestigial organ, meaning that we don't really need it anymore. It's still there. It's much like your tailbone. Obviously, we don't have tails, but we still have the remnants from our ancestors, from very, very old ancestors that did have tails. There are 4 basic layers that are going to make up the GI tract from the lower esophagus to the anal canal. Starting with the first layer, this is the innermost layer. It is the mucous membrane. This is an extremely important layer because it is going to secrete mucus, which is going to lubricate whatever is moving through. So typically that's going to be food, right? So as food is moving through your digestive system, it needs to stay lubricated. If it is not lubricated, it will not move through your digestive tract. One of the things, and you can kind of ignore these two, this is the one I want you to know, it's very important, is the villi that are going to make up this inner layer of the GI tract. Make sure you know that the villi are going to increase surface area. Super duper important to understand. So if you pop over here to this graphic to the right, you can see these villi projecting out, and they are little finger-like projections. One, they are going to help with the movement of food through the digestive tract, as well as increase surface area. That's the big one. So as things move through, you are going to come in contact more when you have something that does this little kind of roller coaster look than if you just had a nice smooth tube. So very important, this is going to increase our absorption, which leads us to the second layer, the submucosa, which is going to contain blood and lymphatic vessels, and its main function is for nutrient absorption. It is going to secrete buffers and enzymes, but the main thing I want you to get is that nutrients are going to be absorbed here. So we are going to diffuse through these layers, and that nutrients is going to go straight into your blood and lymphatic vessels. The third layer is going to be the muscularis. So quite obviously with that name, this is going to be a muscle layer. It is a smooth muscle layer where the inner is going to be circular and the outer is longitudinal. When it comes to there being multiple layers that kind of run in different directions, that is going to allow for these structures to be able to expand as something is potentially moving through it. When we start talking about the reproductive system, that is actually how the layers of the penis are going to look as well, and you'll see that a little bit better then. But it is for these organs to be able to expand, not dissimilar to how rugae, which are wrinkles inside of an organ, allow for that organ to also expand. Do make a little note here, we have the mesenteric plexus. This is going to have to do with the nervous system, and this mesenteric plexus is going to essentially be like the brains of the gut, and this is going to help with motility of things moving through the GI tract. The last layer that we're going to talk about is the serosa. This is the serous membrane. It is not going to be located in the oral cavity, the pharynx, esophagus, or the rectum. Those organs are instead going to be covered by a membrane called the adventitia, and that is just a dense network of collagen fibers. When it comes to membranes, this is typically just going to be what holds these organs in place, if you will. Movement in the GI tract. There are two types of movement that I want you to know. The first is peristalsis. Peristalsis is going to be where you have waves of muscle contraction. So what you're going to have, give me just a second to kind of draw this out, is you're going to have, let's say, a bolus of food here. So whatever this may be, maybe you just ate a cookie or a sandwich or something, and you've chewed it up and you've swallowed it. So this bolus of food is going to need to move down your esophagus, and how this works is you're going to have a contraction behind this bolus of food. So that is going to squeeze. Meanwhile, in front of this bolus of food, as it is moving this way, you are going to have this dilation or relaxation. And what's going to happen is it's going to move the food, or this bolus of food, through by contracting and relaxing, and it's going to inch along down your digestive tract, specifically more in the esophagus for this particular type of movement. The second type of movement is segmentation. This means that there's no set pattern of contractions and no particular direction of movement. This is going to occur in most areas of the small intestine and some portions of the large intestine. So do make sure that you know that peristalsis is going to be more specifically in the esophagus. Meanwhile, segmentation is going to be mostly in the intestines. You can test peristalsis if you would like. It's probably not going to be the most comfortable, but if you have ever had the hiccups and drank water or something upside down, you can still, for the most part, consume something while you're upside down or reclined or laying on your side or something, or on your back, and that is due to that peristalsis. Coming down here, we do have the digestive regulation mechanisms. So how this is to be explained, or how I will explain it, is that you have a few ways that your body is going to control how you digest food. So the first one is going to be local factors. You may have a change in your pH or the lumen as food is moving through. You have neural control mechanisms. This is going to be through the vagus nerve, which is a long nerve going down your neck and into your chest. And then hormonal control mechanisms. So this is the enteroendocrine cells, which you can think of this as the gut brain, which are going to control all of your digestive needs, if you will. Moving into the mouth or the oral cavity, and I know we've gone over the mouth and throat quite a bit. A lot of this kind of plays back into the respiratory system and various other systems. We've talked about this when we talked about the skull just in general. So just kind of bear with me. A lot of this might be a little bit of a repeat, but it is important to know these things. Starting with the lips, we like to call those the labia. Whenever you have lips on any part of your body, that is just labia. They are used for tactile purposes, so touch and speech. One of the most important things that you use with your lips as well is for temperature. You test things out. If something's too hot, typically you won't swallow, or you won't let it into your mouth if something is too warm or maybe too cold. Your teeth are there to grind food and increase the surface area on foods so that enzymes can break them down further, as well as to make it a little bit more manageable to swallow. Your tongue is going to be this large skeletal muscle that is going to help shape food, as well as used for speech. Your hard palate, which we've talked about a few times in this class, is going to be that hard anterior portion of the roof of your mouth. If you could, you can probably use your tongue to feel the roof of your mouth, and you might feel these little ridges up there. The way that those ridges are typically laid out on the roof of your mouth is to help food move back through to your throat. If you've ever seen a cat's mouth, they actually have a few more ridges, as well as little spikes on their tongue, which is kind of cool to see. If you don't have a cat, maybe you can borrow one from somebody and take a peek at their mouth. The cat's mouth, not your friend's. What you'll see is that the way their mouths are is it's perfect for catching prey. Humans do not need teeth or mouths to catch prey, as we do not have that need anymore to catch prey with our mouths, which is kind of interesting to compare our mammalian mouth to another mammal's mouth that might be a predator or a prey item. Moving on to stuff that has more to do with this class. So we do have the soft palate, which is going to end in the uvula. So do keep in mind the purpose of the uvula, while it is sort of an escape hatch or escape lever for food, if it is touched or prodded in some capacity, it can cause vomiting. But its main purpose is to kind of swing back this way so that it closes the nasal passage when you swallow. This is to prevent food from going up into your nose. And then down here, this term that I've already mentioned is a bolus. A bolus is going to be a ball of food that is going to move down the throat after being lubricated by saliva. This is probably one of the most disconcerting photos, but I think it's kind of interesting to see these various parts. So obviously we're going to have our cheeks on the side, our lips, we have a top lip and a bottom lip. This area between your lip and your teeth or gums is known as the vestibule. You're going to have the hard and soft palate ending in the uvula back here. You are going to have various salivary glands, and I believe I have a better picture of those, so just stay tuned. Obviously, we have our tongue right here, our teeth, a top row and a bottom row. Something that you maybe didn't know the name of, but now you will, is you have labial frenulums. Frenulums are going to be this little bit of tissue that is connecting your lip to your gums. Now, they're really quite interesting in my opinion. You have one down here, as well as one right underneath your tongue. So that is the lingual frenulum versus the labial frenulum. So meaning anything that's kind of referenced with lingual, it's speaking about the tongue. Labial is obviously going to be your lips. But these frenulums are going to be located in your mouth, as well as there is another frenulum that we will discuss later in this class when we talk about the reproductive system. There is a frenulum on the male penis, which is really quite interesting. You are going to have various tonsils, which we have already discussed, but from here we can see the palatine tonsil, and I don't believe in this photo we can see much more. You can ignore the fauces and the pharyngeal arches. I don't really care if you know those or not. Right, so here are our salivary glands. These are really quite interesting, and especially where they're placed, I think, in my opinion, really cool. And do keep in mind that your salivary glands are going to kind of be a little bit closely associated with your tonsils, but they don't serve the same purpose, obviously. Tonsils are going to be part of the lymphatic system as well as your immune system. Your salivary glands are going to be releasing saliva, which is going to be mostly water, so 99.5% water. They're going to include some solutes, and those solutes are going to include sodium, potassium, chloride, bicarbonate, and phosphate, urea, uric acid, mucus, and immunoglobulin A, and bacteriolytic enzyme lysosomes. So you might be saying, why would it need to include all of that? Well, that's to kill off any bacteria as well as maybe any pathogens that might find their way into your mouth. It's a good line of defense. It's also a way to protect your teeth. It is going to have a pH of 6.35 to 6.85, which is relatively interesting, I think, in my opinion. And then I really love this little statistic here. The average amount of saliva secreted daily is between 1,000 and 1,500 milliliters. That is between 1 and 1.6 quarts. And if your mouth isn't really filling up with saliva right now, which is just sort of a subconscious response thinking about saliva, it's kind of interesting, in my opinion. So there are three types of glands, or three glands in your mouth, three salivary glands. You have the parotid, which is going to be this guy back here. If you find kind of the corner of your jaw, which is just underneath your ear, give that a little touch. That is going to be where you have your parotid gland. And you have one on either side, of course. The submandibular gland is going to be at the floor of your mouth, so right underneath here. So that's a little further back and kind of just where your underneath your chin meets your throat. That's going to be where that gland is. And the sublingual glands, these are going to be directly underneath your tongue. What's interesting about the sublingual glands is if you move your tongue in a particular way, you can potentially make the sublingual glands squirt out saliva, which I've always found really quite interesting when people can do that on command. I believe the common term for that is gleeking. So that is what the sublingual glands can do since they're directly underneath the tongue. Again, a nice photo showing us all these nice structures in the oral cavity. You can use this as a reference if you'd like, but you don't need to completely save all this information. Moving on to your teeth. So your teeth are very interesting structures, and remember when we were talking about the skeletal system, teeth are not bones. Do keep that in mind as we work through our teeth. Your teeth are similar to bones, and they are usually included in skeletons when we look at the skeletal system, but they are not bones. Let's go over the parts of the teeth. This top portion that you are able to see when you look at someone's mouth, maybe your own mouth, that is known as the crown, so the visible portion of the tooth. The top of your molars, so this is only going to include your molars, this rough portion on the top is going to be the occlusal surface. The area between the crown and the root, and also where your tooth is going to meet the gums, is going to be the neck. The part of the tooth that you cannot see that is below the gums is going to be the root. Surrounding the entire tooth is going to be enamel. So the part that you are able to see when you look at your tooth, that outer surface, that outside layer, is enamel. It's incredibly hard. It is composed of calcium and phosphate, and it's relatively difficult to break unless you are consuming items or maybe your saliva isn't kind of up to snuff, but sugar can wear this down. A lot of sugar smoking can also cause the enamel to wear away. Soda is a big one, and so is wine and coffee. Cementum is going to be the next layer that we're going to talk about here. That is going to be just within that layer of enamel. It is going to be the outside portion of the root. Dentin, which is going to be this next layer here, and you can see it kind of looks a little bit like straw. Obviously, if you opened up a tooth, it wouldn't look exactly like that, but it is the living layer, and it's bone-like. But again, do keep in mind, teeth are not bones, but it is bone-like. But it is the living layer. Your pulp cavity is going to be this area right here. So if we took all of the little bits out of the center of the pulp cavity, which is just known as pulp, it would become an empty cavity. But when it is full of pulp, it is filled with nerves and blood vessels. You are going to have a structure called the periodontal ligament, and I don't know. Ooh, yep, right here, periodontal ligament. It's going to be what is holding the tooth into the socket. And last but not least, when we discuss gingiva, that is going to be in reference to your gums. There are different types of teeth, and I do want you to know them all. The first is going to be the incisors. There are 8 of them. So you have 4 on top and 4 on bottom. In total, 8. So these are going to be your first 8 teeth at the very front of your mouth. They serve the purpose of cutting off food. You can kind of think of biting off part of maybe an apple or a sandwich. So these are going to be the teeth that you use to cut food off. The next tooth that we're going to discuss is going to be your canines. You're going to have, whoop, the little guy just disappeared, 2 on top and 2 on bottom, with a total of 4. Your canines, or cuspids, are going to be used for the purpose of tearing or shredding food apart. A lot of people think of these as like your vampire teeth. They can be sharper on some people rather than on others, but these are your canines or your cuspids. Next, we are going to look at the premolars or bicuspids. There are 8 of them. So again, 2 on top. I'm sorry, 4 on top, 2 on either side, and 4 on the bottom, 2 on either side. These are going to be what kind of appear to be sharper molars, and they are used for the purpose of tearing. And then last but not least, we do have our molars, and you can have between 8 and 12 molars. So we do have all of these guys in the back, and in this particular graphic, we have 12. So molars do serve the purpose of grinding and crushing, and they are going to have that occlusal surface. And you can see those surfaces there in this picture, the way it kind of makes like a little cross here. It is perfect for grinding. Something kind of interesting to make note of is going to be that children have 20 teeth, as opposed to an adult having 32, and that is if they don't have a set of wisdom teeth or a third set of molars coming in. And I've mentioned this term before, but they are vestigial. Wisdom teeth are vestigial. That means it is a functionless remnant. The reason that we even have wisdom teeth come in is from our ancestors that had a different diet that required a third set of molars because their original molars begin to wear away, so they have another set come in. When it comes to children, again, they have less teeth because they have smaller mouths, and that's why adult teeth look so adorable in a way on children. The teeth look too big. I always think of Hermione Granger from the Harry Potter series. But in reference to baby teeth, I want you to know them as deciduous teeth. They can also be called milk teeth. So those are just baby teeth or the first set of teeth. I would be remiss not to mention ways to protect your teeth, of course. I think this is very important because lately there's been quite a bit of I guess, buzz over the internet over how to do certain things, at least around the time that I made these slides, maybe about 2 years ago. One of the biggest things that was going around was using activated charcoal and rubbing it against your teeth for 5 minutes, and then you could see a noticeable difference. Well, yeah, you could see a difference because you were rubbing off the enamel from your teeth, which, as we know from this class, you don't get back. If your enamel comes off, well, that's it. Your tooth is pretty much done and you need to see a dentist in order to fix up your teeth. So ways to make sure that your teeth are nice and healthy is brushing in the morning and before bed, using a toothpaste that is going to be effective in getting the results that you want. Obviously not using activated charcoal, which is just rocks, is not going to get you that desired effect because you will need new teeth. Rinsing your mouth with water after drinking coffee, soda, and wine, because those will cause problems with the enamel as well as staining. And doing just regular research on teeth whitening products. Using bleach and things of that nature might not be good if you swallow it. Using the lights, they might be a little bit on the expensive side, so keeping those things in mind as well. Things that you shouldn't do, smoking is obviously going to cause yellowing of the teeth, and then sitting and sipping, or prolonged exposure to beverages or food that can cause staining. So if you are the type of person like me who it takes forever to drink, let's say, just one soda for some reason, I have a hard time drinking a whole soda in one sitting, I'll kind of sit and sip as I work on things or watch a movie, that's not the best thing to do for your teeth. Things that can go wrong with your teeth, and some of you may have experienced this at some point in your life, but when your teeth grow in wrong, and typically this is going to be with your adult teeth, orthodontists and dentists don't really care too much with the baby teeth unless it is causing a problem for the child to chew or causing a problem with the adult teeth coming in. Typically, you won't have braces on deciduous or milk or baby teeth. Those will typically go on your adult teeth. Between the ages of 6 and 11 is when children lose their milk teeth. Things that can cause problems with teeth growing in, so those adult teeth growing in, is if the baby teeth don't fall out during that time. Also, prolonged sucking, such as on a thumb or a pacifier, can cause the teeth to grow in wrong. Sometimes it's just hereditary that teeth don't grow in straight, or if there's a problem with those milk teeth, being as we rot those baby teeth out. That can also cause problems and may require braces. I actually don't need you to know these 3 types of cavities. Just know that cavities can be located in the enamel, at the top, along the sides, or even below the gum. So that is known as a root cavity. So kind of interesting thing to make a note of. And if you're really quite interested in teeth, looking up these various types of fake teeth being put in, so an implant, which is going to require a screw, a crown, which is going over the top of the tooth, and a veneer, which is also going over the top of the tooth, which you do need to grind the teeth down in order to put a veneer on. But it's serving the purpose of trying to, at least these two, protect as much of what's left of the tooth as possible is going to be the goal of the dentist. I love this little warning. Of course, you can kind of skip through this section if you want to. I think it's really quite interesting, but it is a little bit on the gross side. So just prepare yourself. If you're eating something while watching this, I'd maybe put it down for a minute. This is what's known as a hairy tongue. It is a condition where there is too much bacteria or yeast growing on the papillae of the tongue. And if you remember when we were talking about the tongue and our sense of taste, the papillae are each one of these little circles down here, these little projections, and within those papillae you have your taste buds. So what happens with this condition is that the papillae get yeast, or this is definitely bacteria, growing on these papillae. And how that happens is that instead of shedding, as papillae should do, this bacteria is preventing it from breaking off, which is not a bad thing. We do want that. And if you brush your teeth regularly, which hopefully you do, you also brush your tongue. It's a very important thing to do. It is going to help the health of your tongue to brush it. It's going to help your tongue shed these papillae. So, very important. What some of the symptoms of this condition include is a loss of taste, as well as you can probably imagine, very bad breath. We have talked about our sense of taste a few times now. Just a little refresher, what you can taste. Know that it is a chemical signal. We've talked about flavor versus taste. Of course, we have talked about this before, so we'll just kind of, if you want to pause it, take a look at it. Awesome. Otherwise, moving on. This is a unique condition, which I actually have, which is why I include it, because I think it's really quite interesting. This is what's known as a geographic or a map tongue. And if you know that you have it, that's awesome. If if you want to take a look at your tongue right now, see if maybe you have it. It's sort of a cool thing to bring up to other people, I think. But the symptoms include smooth or red patches. Sometimes they're more kind of white on the top or side of the tongue. These patches change in location, size, and shape, and mine changes constantly, almost daily. I've never gotten a pattern that looks quite like this one, which I think is really, really neat. Mine typically more looks like the one on the right. A lot of people think that maybe it might be a yeast infection with the way that it looks, but truly it is not. It is just a condition where the pattern on your tongue changes. The causes are unknown, although it might be genetic, perhaps. Flare-ups can occur due to stress. It can also cause discomfort and sensitivity in the mouth. I do experience a little bit more of a sensitivity to spicier foods, as well as I do have a little oral allergy to fruit. This condition mixed with that causes the papillae on my tongue to really not have a good time, and especially on the margins of my tongue, if I eat something such as pineapple or a banana. It'll cause the papillae on the margins of my tongue to kind of swell and be a little bit uncomfortable. All right, moving down from the oral cavity into the pharynx and the esophagus. Remember, when we talk about the pharynx, we're just talking about the back of the throat. The esophagus is going to be this long muscular tube, and I know I said to kind of make a note of it when we were talking about the respiratory system, but it is just a tube as opposed to the trachea, which is going to have rings. So do keep in mind the esophagus is a nice straight tube, and the trachea is going to have rings of cartilage. Another thing I want you to make note of, because I don't know that I've said this before, the trachea is going to be in front of your esophagus. So if you've ever heard of someone needing a tracheotomy, that means that there's going to be an incision along the front of the throat, which is going to open up into the trachea and not the esophagus, because the trachea is, of course, in front of the esophagus. There are two sphincters within the esophagus. It's okay not to know them. Just make a note that there are sphincters. And do make sure you know what sphincters are. They are a band-like ring of muscle. We will talk about, I think, 3 or 4 more sphincters before this lecture is done. Just make a note that you know what it is. Then we have talked about this structure before as well, the epiglottis. It is that little flap. So remember, we've got our glottis right here. Sorry, that was a terrible circle. But we do have our epiglottis, which is going to be a flap of cartilage that is going to try to prevent food from entering the trachea as you swallow food into your esophagus. All right, moving on down a little bit further, and this is kind of moving past where we are going to go next, but these are the mesenteries. Food is not going to pass through these, so do keep that in mind as we are talking about these structures. Nothing is passing through them. Their purpose is to protect, cover, and hold still your intestines and everything in your abdominal cavity. I think this graphic over here is kind of interesting looking. It is from a cadaver. But what these mesenteries look like is scrambled eggs, but they are yellow and look like that. 1, because this cadaver is a little bit dried out, and 2, because they are mostly fat. So the first mesentery I want you to know is going to be the peritoneum. This is a large serous membrane, and do keep in mind that when we talk about these serous membranes, it is going to typically serve the purpose to support and hold in place these organs. The greater omentum is going to be a large fold that drapes over the transverse colon, and the transverse colon is going to be this structure up here. So transverse meaning from right to left, but that is going to be this little fatty apron that is going to drape over that. One of the things that's interesting about the greater omentum, if you have a gentleman in your life, maybe a dad or grandpa, an uncle, significant other, and they have one of those little beer bellies, that is their greater omentum becoming very fatty and thick. So that is what causes a beer belly in men, is this greater omentum. If we were to do a dissection, you would literally remove this structure and pull it back like it's like a blanket. They're really quite interesting, and it just covers this entire abdominal cavity like a blanket. You have the mesentery proper, which is going to bind the small intestine to the abdominal wall. Very important. In fact, I believe that is this guy up here. You just can't see the small intestine here. It is just not in this picture. And then the mesocolon, which is going to be this guy up here. It is going to connect the large intestine to the body wall. So again, when we talk about these mesenteries or these serous membranes, they are going to be holding organs in place or protecting them in some capacity, like the greater omentum. Continuing into the lesser omentum, this is going to connect the stomach to the liver and provide an access route for blood vessels and other structures entering and leaving the liver. And you can see a few of these mesenteries that we were talking about before. And then the last mesentery that I want you to know is the falciform ligament. This is going to connect the liver to the anterior body wall. So, very important. And you can see that guy right here. Moving on into the stomach. So let's say that we are following the progression of food. We've got this bolus of food moving down the esophagus, and it is going to want to go into our stomach here. The stomach is going to be a large muscular sac just beneath the diaphragm, so that big muscle right underneath the lungs. It is going to expand when it is full, and that is due to these rugae. Rugae are going to be folds that allow the stomach to expand. Again, we've talked about rugae before. Rugae are going to be located within various organs such as the bladder, the uterus, and also the stomach. There are parts of the stomach that I do want you to know. This top portion, and you can kind of follow along down here if you want to. So this portion that kind of projects up is going to be known as the fundus. This area just below this sphincter right here is the cardia. This larger area right here is the body. And then down here closer to the bottom is the pylorus. And the pylorus is going to be by this sphincter here. The sphincter that's up a little bit higher, which up here it's called the esophageal sphincter, can also be called the cardiac sphincter, while this sphincter here is the pyloric sphincter. So again, those are just rings of muscle that are going to be relaxed or contracted to allow food to go through either into this organ or out into the next organ. Within the stomach, we are going to have something called hydrochloric acid. This has a pH of 2. This is very important to make a note of because that's incredibly acidic. This is so acidic that if given enough time, you can eat through metal, essentially. Not you personally, your teeth would probably break, but hydrochloric acid is acidic enough to eat through metal. And it is one of the main components of your gastric juices. Another part of your gastric juices is going to be pepsin. It is a digestive enzyme, very important. This term down here at the bottom is chyme. Chyme is going to be a pulpy acidic fluid, which is just a combination of gastric juices and partially digested food. And that is going to be what is churning around and around inside of your stomach until it becomes small enough and liquidy enough to come out through that pyloric sphincter. This slide starts with some structures that we have already gone over on the last slide, but it does label these structures out a little bit better on this graphic if you want to take a peek at that. Mainly what I want you to get from this slide is going to be these three sort of functions and how these functions occur. The first is propulsion, and we mentioned this a little bit before, but these are going to be peristaltic waves that move gastric contents from the body of the stomach down into the antrum. The antrum is going to be this lower portion down here. Retropulsion is going to be occurring due to the fact that most of the food particles in the stomach are initially too large to fit through the narrow opening of the pyloric sphincter right here. So it is going to force the contents of the stomach, instead of going down here in this bottom portion, it's going to push it back up into the body of the stomach. So that's going to kind of keep occurring until these food particles are small enough to fit through our pyloric sphincter. This is going to be what's called gastric emptying. So this is once food particles and chyme, which I know this is not spelled correctly, there should be a Y instead of an I, are small enough to pass through the pyloric sphincter. It is going to empty out the contents of the stomach, at least in the bottom portion here, into the small intestine, which is what this tube right here is. It will empty 3 milliliters at a time, roughly, and food may remain in the fundus for about an hour without becoming mixed with gastric juices. So this does take quite a long time, a few hours, in order to make food small enough that it can be passed into the small intestine. What's kind of interesting about gastric emptying is that if we looked at, let's pretend this is the pyloric sphincter and this little opening here in the middle, what's going to occur if the stomach is on the other side and we are looking at it from this angle looking in right there? Gastric juices as well as food particles are going to come shooting out of this. So literally it's going to be propelled from the stomach into the small intestine. I always remember the first time I took anatomy and physiology in college, my teacher at the time, Dr. Bergfeld, demonstrated this by putting Coca-Cola in his mouth, forming a small hole with his fingers, and then spitting through the hole into the room. It was quite something, to be perfectly honest. But it definitely got the point across as to the force that gastric emptying takes, and also how food and gastric juices pass through that little sphincter there. Moving on to some things that can kind of go wrong when it comes to the stomach, acid reflux being one of them. If you've ever experienced acid reflux, it feels like there's a burning in your chest or in your esophagus. A healthy sphincter is what we are looking at over here. So it is closing so that nothing inside is able to come out into the esophagus. If there is a faulty or damaged sphincter, or possibly, some type of digestive problem in general, the sphincter may not be able to close properly, and then you're going to have acid coming up into the esophagus. When this is something that occurs more often, it is something called GERD, or gastroesophageal reflux disease, as opposed to if it happens every once in a while, this is going to be something more like heartburn, but that is when the stomach acid flows up and irritates the lining of the esophagus. Now, if this is an every once in a while type of thing, it's not much to worry about. Obviously, it's uncomfortable, but the thing to be more concerned about is if this happens more often. This can cause a damage to not only this sphincter if it happens more often, but also to the lining of the esophagus. Your esophagus is not equipped with the proper cells to make sure that your stomach acid doesn't eat away at it and cause sores or openings, which can occur, which is not a good thing, obviously. Your small intestine, however, does have the ability to maintain itself when interacting with this stomach acid, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in just a moment. But your esophagus does not. The other thing that does not have a good way of protecting itself frequently from stomach acid is your mouth, so your stomach and your teeth. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute too. Moving into the small intestine from the stomach, so we are passing in through here. The small intestine is split up into 3 parts: the duodenum, or duodenum, however you want to pronounce it, the jejunum, and the ileum. The entire small intestine is going to be roughly 6 meters long, and for those of you who know it better than using metric, is going to be 20 feet long. That's pretty long. It is named for its diameter, so how wide it is compared to the large intestine. So it is smaller, small intestine, large intestine. But the small intestine is substantially longer than the large intestine. It is the main site for chemical digestion, which maybe surprises some of you, in that it is not the stomach that is the primary place for chemical digestion, but that is the small intestine. It is also where you're going to have most of your nutrients absorbed into the bloodstream. Moving on into the different parts. Now I'm going to try to change colors here. So the duodenum, or duodenum, is going to be this first kind of shorter portion coming off of the stomach. This is only going to be around 10 inches long, which is a substantially small portion for the small intestine. It is closest to the stomach and begins the small intestine. In this area, please make a note of this because it's very important, especially with the last slide that we were just talking about, neutralizing acidic chyme. Remember, chyme is going to be that combination of gastric juices and food particles all mixed together. But that gastric juice still has a pH of 2. We don't want to start digesting our own organs, so in this area we are going to neutralize that acidic chyme and make it to where we don't digest ourselves. The next section is going to be the jejunum. The jejunum is going to be this more teal portion moving around and about up here just after the duodenum. The jejunum is going to be 8.2 feet long. This is going to be where we have chemical digestion and nutrient absorption occurring. This last portion down here, the ileum, is going to be a whopping 11 feet long, and this is also going to be where we have absorption occurring. We do have something that we did talk about in the lymphatic system. Peyer's patches are going to be located within the ileum and mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue. So we are going to have lymphatic tissue all through this part of our small intestine, as well as all these happy little blood vessels in order to absorb our nutrients. This structure right here at the bottom, so right at the end of the ileum, is going to enter into the large intestine. But before we do that, we want to take a little closer look at our villi and microvilli. Again, when we talk about these villi, which are just these finger-like projections that are going to increase our surface area, super duper important. These are going to be the folds in the walls. They are finger-like projections that are going to increase and enhance our absorption. Running through the center is going to be capillary beds, which again, we know capillary beds are going to use diffusion to move things across our membrane here. So in the lungs, we are picking up and dropping off carbon dioxide. When it comes to the intestines, we are picking up nutrients from our food. We might also be picking up some water in order to take into our bloodstream in order to deliver that throughout, keep us nice and hydrated. But very, very important, and just so it's nice and easy to kind of comprehend, all of these little villi are going to be able to absorb what we need to absorb from our food and beverages that we consume. Microvilli, on the other hand, are going to be folds within the folds. So if you take a look at this graphic going into a smaller depiction of what's on the villi, we have our microvilli. And as I said before, our villi are going to help with absorption, but they also help with movement. So these little microvilli located on the villi are going to help things move across the surfaces of the villi. So they are keeping things moving, if you will, downstream. Moving into the large intestine. The large intestine serves three main functions, and they are important enough that I made a slide for it by itself. The large intestine is going to serve the purpose of reabsorbing water and compacting the contents such as food and other particles into feces. We are going to absorb important vitamins generated by bacterial action. So you do have bacteria located in the large intestine, and these are going to be bacteria that are symbiotic with us. What that means is it's good bacteria. It's bacteria that you want, that you need inside of your body in order to help you digest, as well as that bacteria gets to live there in your large intestine, living happily off of the things that you eat. The other very important role of the large intestine is to store fecal matter prior to defecation. If your body did not have this ability, you would be defecating yourself constantly, but because of the way the large intestine is, especially with the rectum, you are able to store fecal matter so that you can go at your leisure. All right, so we are now in the large intestine, or the colon. We're going to start over here, so let's pretend that we just left the ileum of the small intestine and we're popping into this structure, the cecum. The cecum is the first part of the colon, and you could ignore this sphincter and ignore these flexures. I don't really need you to know them. They're interesting, but don't worry about them. The appendix is going to be this little worm-like structure that is coming off the end of the cecum, so this big projected portion of the large intestine. You've probably heard of the appendix. I have mentioned it in this lecture already. What the appendix is it is a pouch. It is vestigial, so you don't need it. It is something that is a remnant from our ancestors, and initially the purpose of it was to help animals that eat large amounts of plant material break that down better, because our bodies honestly are not the best at breaking down plant material. Typically when you see prey animals such as rabbits, they are going to have a very long large intestine and small intestine, which is going to give them enough time to break down plant materials. Our intestines are going to be kind of on an intermediate side. Yes, we can break plant material down, but not very well. Carnivores, such as cats or bears or things of that nature that might eat more meat, they actually have relatively short intestines because it doesn't really take too much effort from our intestines to break down meat, but it takes more effort to break down plant material. Back to the purpose of the appendix. It is going to house bacteria that help break down plant material. Another purpose might be that it helps fight infections. Now, obviously, there's a little catch here. If you've ever heard of appendicitis, that is where the appendix becomes infected itself and it can burst or cause other problems. If it bursts, obviously that's not a good thing, but it might need to be removed before that happens. It just kind of depends on that particular circumstance. So moving from the cecum, we are going to, what's kind of odd, move up into the large intestine and into the ascending colon. This is going to be along the right side of the body and go up just underneath the diaphragm, which we are then going to enter into the transverse colon. And that is going to be this horizontal portion moving right underneath the diaphragm across the body from right to left. From there, we're going to do a little turn and go down the left side of the body, which is the descending colon. Enter into this sort of curved portion called the sigmoid colon. Enter into the rectum right here, which is going to be the terminal portion of the colon, as well as where fecal matter is stored prior to defecation. And then, of course, we have the anus, which is the exit. And there are two sphincters. I do want you to know them. We have the internal anal sphincter and the external anal sphincter. The internal anal sphincter is not something that you can control, but you do control the external anal sphincter. So one is smooth muscle, the other is skeletal muscle with a little bit of smooth muscle. Do make note that the ascending and descending colon are retroperitoneal and attached to the abdominal wall, and this term down here, which should have an underline, is called mass movements. These are going to be powerful peristaltic contractions that are going to move this material within the large intestine through and out. Comparatively to the small intestine, the large intestine wall does not have villi, but it does have distinctive intestinal glands. These are going to be dominated by our good friend the goblet cells, which, remember, are going to produce mucus. And if we have a lot of them, very, very important, it is going to produce a lot of mucus to lubricate the feces as the feces becomes drier and more compact. We have to be able to move these products through the large intestine using mass movements and the mucus from our goblet cells in order to get it out of the body. And of course, this topic might make you ever so slightly uncomfortable. Just know that everybody poops. It is a perfectly normal function for all humans on Earth. Everybody does it, and if they say that they don't, they're lying. So, feces. Once feces enters the rectum, so that last portion before you get to the anus of the colon, that is where you start to have conscious perception that you need to use the bathroom, if you will. 75% of feces is going to be just water, and what's also included is going to be fiber, dead and live bacteria, various cells, and mucus. What's interesting is the difference between soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Soluble fiber is going to include things in your diet such as beans and nuts. This is going to break down into a gel-like substance, so substantially softer, if you will, but still changed. Insoluble fiber is going to include things like corn, oat bran, and carrots. These can look relatively unchanged even after going through your entire body. So if maybe you have ever looked in the toilet, which I always suggest doing after using the bathroom, whether it's to urinate, defecate, or vomit, you should always kind of see what's coming out of you so that you can make informed decisions in your life. If you are, for instance, using the bathroom and you notice that there is blood in your urine, vomit, or feces, it is very important to see a doctor. That may be a very bad underlying condition that, had you not looked, could go unnoticed. But if you've ever taken a peek into the toilet, you may have noticed after you've eaten corn, or I know another one can be seaweed. If you eat a lot of sushi, potentially you have noticed seaweed or say really fibrous items like maybe celery or bacteria. You've eaten quite a bit of that. That may be noticeable where it looks relatively unchanged. Color definitely matters. Again, this can be an indicator of your health. So maybe your diet is changing the color of your feces. If there's blood in your stool, that can be a problem, as well as medication intake. This may be slightly unknown to you, but one of the main components of Pepto-Bismol, so that nice pink fluid that you potentially have drunk when your stomach is hurting, that contains a product called bismuth. Bismuth is fantastic for soothing tummy aches, but it can also turn your feces black. And what black feces can sometimes mean, if it's not bismuth related, is that you may have blood coming out of your intestines and into the lumen of your intestines somewhere higher up. So that can be a bad thing, but it is important to make a note of that if the color of your feces changes, just try to figure out why. Shape matters, and that's mostly based on fiber, but it can be caused by disease. So what I mean by shape is sometimes they can be more round shaped, maybe irregular shaped, really large or long shaped. It just kind of depends. Smell can be an indicator of health as well. Obviously, stool is not the most pleasant smelling thing, and it is pretty common for it to be unpleasant. But if it is particularly bad, that could be an indication of parasites or maybe a more serious digestive problem. Being consistent is important when defecating. A decrease or increase can indicate problems, maybe involving the thyroid or colon cancer, maybe ulcerative colitis. It kind of just depends. And then whether or not feces sinks or floats. This is usually an indication of fat content. So if you are someone who is on a diet such as the ketogenic diet, that is a diet that requires you to have a very high fat intake as well as low sugar and low carb, little to no actually. But what ketosis does is it puts your body into a state of ketogenesis where you are basically burning fat instead of sugar, which is going to cause you to have a very quick weight loss. But typically with that type of situation, you're probably going to have feces that floats due to the fat content of your diet. All right, moving on to our accessory players, because we have gone through all of the organs that are going to have food passing through it. These accessory players are very important because they are going to help you with your digestion even though food is not passing through them. The first is going to be the liver. This is going to be the largest gland in your body. It is roughly 3 pounds. It serves the purpose of detoxifying chemicals and metabolizing drugs. It also produces a byproduct called bile. This is due to hemoglobin degradation. This is just a byproduct of breaking down red blood cells. Bile is going to help with digestion and the absorption of fats. What's interesting about the liver is this is only a handful of functions that it serves. It's estimated that it has around 200 known functions aside from these. Kind of interesting. The gallbladder is going to be that little green bean on a string just below the liver. It is going to secrete more digestive juices and be where bile is stored until it is released through the bile duct into the duodenum of the small intestine. Your pancreas is going to look kind of like a ear of corn, in my opinion. It sits just kind of nuzzled up underneath the stomach. And again, this is also a gland, and its exocrine cells are going to secrete buffers and digestive enzymes also into the duodenum. And its endocrine cells are going to secrete several hormones, which we have already discussed. So moving more into the liver, again, it is roughly 3 pounds. It is your heaviest gland. It has right and left lobes, a caudate and a quadrate lobe. So make sure that you make a note of where these lobes are. If you move the liver around, you can see them a little bit better. So we've got our right, we've got our left. We have our caudate, and we have our quadrate lobes. The falciform ligament is going to separate the right and left lobes. You have the round ligament, which is going to hold this organ in place. You have the coronary ligament, which is going to be part of the peritoneum, my goodness, I can't speak, that suspends the liver from the diaphragm. And then I do want you to know this term, sorry, my cat just jumped up onto my lap, hepatocytes. So this is just liver cells. So again, if you ever see the term cyte, that's just talking about cells. I don't know if you can hear my cat purring. Get down, buddy. But these liver cells are going to secrete 400 to 800 milliliters of bile a day. This is going to be a yellow to brownish olive green liquid, and that is why the gallbladder is green itself. It kind of gets stained from all that bile. What's interesting is that bile is also going to give feces its brown color as it is released into the small intestine. It ends up pigmenting your feces, and that is why it's brown. A few things that can go wrong with your liver while we're talking about it is hepatitis and jaundice. Hepatitis is just any inflammation of the liver. This can be caused by alcohol abuse, drugs, or possibly an infection. The two that I want you to know are going to be cirrhosis and viral hepatitis A, B, and C. Cirrhosis is going to be hepatitis characterized by degeneration of liver cells with the replacement of scar tissue, while viral hepatitis A, B, and C is going to be a virus that destroys liver cells and causes inflamed tender liver and high fevers. Jaundice is a condition where you have the buildup of bilirubin, so instead of going into the gallbladder, we have a buildup of it, which causes a yellowing of the skin and eyes. So you can see a physical display of this condition, children and infants can become jaundiced, potentially newborns as well. Usually you see jaundice in older people. This is a condition that can be reversed. It just needs to be caught and then diagnosed and treated. All right. Here we are with the gallbladder. The gallbladder is going to have kind of these basic anatomical structures that make it up. So the fundus, the body, and the neck. What I do want you to make a really big note of is the cystic duct, the hepatic duct, and the common bile duct. This is going to be where we have bile coming into the gallbladder from liver and then exiting the gallbladder into the small intestine. And then this is just a nice little graphic if you want to use it as a reference in order to fill out your homework, if you will, or just have a better look of the liver if you want to look at these lobes and the various parts of the gallbladder. All right, moving on to the pancreas. So we are going to talk more about the exocrine functions, which is going to be secreting hormones into the bloodstream. So these types of cells, these acini cells, are going to make up 99% of the pancreas, as opposed to the pancreatic islet cells, which are going to be 1% and serve for endocrine functions, such as secreting enzymes into various ducts. This is going to be for the purpose of secreting glucagon, insulin, somatostatin, and pancreatic polypeptides. So that is going to be more involved with your blood glucose levels. Meanwhile, these exocrine functions are going to be a secretion of a mixture of fluids and digestive enzymes called, very conveniently, pancreatic juice. So each day your pancreas is going to secrete around 1,200 to 1,500 milliliters of pancreatic juice. This is a clear, colorless liquid that is going to contain water, salts, sodium bicarbonate, and several enzymes. What's important with this pancreatic juice is that it has a pH of 7 to 8, which is going to act as a buffer to the acidic juices from the stomach. So this is where we are going to start trying to we are going to try to increase the pH and lower the acidity of these gastric juices that are in the small intestine here at the very start. So we can see that our stomach is here. This is that pyloric sphincter. This is the start of the small intestine, and we are having the release of bile and pancreatic juices right up here at the top. So we can start lowering the acidity within the small intestine so we don't digest ourselves. Some problems that can occur, some bowel movement problems specifically, include things like diarrhea, which is when stool passes through the large intestine too quickly. This is going to lead to a much more watery consistency within fecal matter. Constipation is going to occur when stool passes the large intestine too slowly. This can cause problems with the stool becoming too hard, meaning that it's going to be more difficult to pass through the anus. Bowel incontinence is a problem controlling bowel movements, so keeping yourself from having a bowel movement when you don't want to. And other abnormalities with bowel movements could be a sign of digestive problems, and that all goes back to when we were talking about the consistency of your fecal matter, so color, smell, shape, consistency, etc. When it comes to gas or flatulence, typically this is just going to be the harmless bacteria within the large intestine breaking down food and releasing a byproduct, as they metabolize, which is just gas. It is normal to pass gas anywhere from 10 to 18 times a day. It's also normal just to be doing what you're doing as long as you are comfortable and healthy. All right, moving into some things that have to do with the digestive system and specifically weight. Being extremely heavy or extremely light are both very big concerns medically. A few terms I do want you to know is anorexia. This is abnormally low body weight, which can be followed up by psychological conditions of intense fear of gaining weight or possibly a distorted perception of weight gain. This can be a life-threatening emotional state that people can become part of. What can happen as a result of anorexia is anemia. So remember, that is not enough oxygen and red blood cells going through the bloodstream. It can cause heart problems, bone loss, so such as like bone density, if you will, not necessarily that you start missing a femur, muscle loss, absence of a period in females, decreased testosterone in males, gastrointestinal problems, and possibly kidney failure. So a bevy of problems can occur due to anorexia. Another term I want you to know when it comes to weight-based disorders is bulimia. Bulimia is where an individual binge eats, so eats quite a bit, and then directly after they purge, which is just vomiting out everything that they just consumed. What this can cause is dehydration, heart problems, tooth decay, and gum disease. Remember, I discussed earlier how your gastric juices aren't meant to be in your esophagus nor in your mouth. Typically, if you're about to throw up and your body knows it, you will start to salivate a particular type of saliva. Now, this doesn't happen every single time, of course, and especially if you do it over and over, such as with people who suffer from bulimia, your body's not going to be able to produce enough in order to keep your teeth from decaying or your gums from decaying due to the gastric juices in your mouth. Other things that can happen with bulimia is an absence of period and digestive problems, just to finish up that little bit there. Now, do keep in mind that these conditions are very common in young women. Men can also be susceptible to this. Mostly these are going to be psychological disorders where this person is going to be experiencing quite a bit of anxiety over their body image. So this is not something to, judge someone for. It is something that you may want to try to seek help for that person. Moving into the opposite side of extreme weights, let's talk about obesity. So this is being extremely overweight. I would like to mention here that the average woman needs about 2,000 calories a day to maintain their current weight. The average man needs about 2,500 calories a day to maintain their current weight. Anything less than those calories a day is going to cause weight loss over time, of course. And anything more than that is going to cause weight gain. What's really interesting is going to be the fact that you are born with all the fat cells in your body, which means that fat cells increase in size rather than in number. So, the only times that you can increase the number of fat cells in your body for males and females is going to be during puberty, and for females it's puberty and pregnancy. Otherwise, you are just increasing the size of the fat cell rather than the number. What I like to mention here is something called the body mass index, or BMI. A lot of people know this, especially if maybe they are more into fitness or maybe sports, this is going to be a weight to height ratio. And in my personal opinion, as well as other health-oriented biologists and scientists and researchers, this is not actually the best way to measure body fat content. If you were to look at this ratio, it is taking your weight divided by your height, and then divide your height again, and then divide by the height again. If you want to do this, by all means, please, but do not take the results to heart, as I don't think it is a very good way to judge body fat content. Speaking of weight, let's talk about how you can gain it and how you can lose it. Weight gain is going to be when you intake more energy than you are spending. This is going to store in your fat cells. Typically, this is through sugar. Again, when it comes to certain diets, you are cutting sugar out so that you are using fat to be used as energy as opposed to sugar. Things that can encourage weight gain or make it harder for weight loss is going to be aging, steroid usage, stress and depression, which can cause you to eat more of the things that comfort you rather than food that is good for your body. Lack of sleep and fluid retention can all cause weight gain. Not everyone carries weight the same. If you look at the way males versus females carry weight, females are going to carry weight more in their chest and hips and thighs. Males have a tendency to carry weight more in their abdominal region as well as their chest and sometimes their back. Losing weight isn't all about exercising or dieting, although both of those really do help. Weight loss typically starts in the kitchen, so what you want to do is be eating the things that are good for your body, no excess sugar or carbohydrates. A good way of losing weight is going to be eating more raw foods and fresh foods. Another important thing in weight control is going to be portion control. So making sure you are not overeating. Obviously don't undereat, you don't want to starve yourself, but controlling your portions is very important. Another thing is to expend more calories than you take in, whether that is moving while you are watching a movie as opposed to sitting and reclining, maybe eating at the same time, but being a little bit more active is definitely going to help with that. And then what I think is the absolute most important thing in order to be happy with your weight, to either, put on weight in the form of muscle or maybe lose weight or tone up or anything like that, is to balance. You don't want to overdo it, but obviously underdoing it may cause weight gain. If you are as much of a fan of the TLC show My 600 Pound Life, as I am, then potentially you have heard of and maybe know what a gastric bypass is. On this slide, I have two types of gastric bypasses, a pouch and a gastric sleeve. So what happens in these particular surgeries is you are going to make the stomach smaller in some capacity. So in this gastric sleeve, we are cutting off all of this part of the stomach in order to make a smaller chamber for the stomach. This is going to allow for this individual to not consume as much food. When it comes to this particular type of surgery over here, the pouch, we are also making the stomach quite small, but we are also bypassing all of that stomach as well as the duodenum or duodenum, and instead we are connecting the jejunum to this part of the stomach. This is going to make it to where you are not absorbing quite as much, as well as you're not going to be able to eat as much, as this is just a smaller portion of the stomach. This is a way for individuals who are quite heavy to lose a lot of weight very quickly. Although if you are able to lose weight by diet and exercise changes, so that doesn't necessarily mean go to the gym, hit the gym every day, but by becoming more active and also eating the right things, less sugar, less carbohydrates, you are going to be able to see a weight loss that will not end in having to get surgery, nor will it end in you having an excess amount of skin, as people who are very heavy, who experience gastric bypass and very quick weight loss do have a tendency to have. What's interesting about the stomach, and I know I say that a lot, what's interesting, it just is, the average stomach can hold about 1 liter or 1 quart of food. When it comes to gastric bypass and making this stomach much smaller, you can only hold an incredibly tiny portion, so about the size of a walnut or a few ounces, as opposed to 1 quart. All right, moving into what is a stomach ache. There are 6 that I'm going to mention on this slide, but that doesn't mean that that is the only thing that can cause a stomach ache. There are many reasons why you may have a stomach ache. So the first is going to be food poisoning. This is going to be a bacteria or toxin in food that is going to cause nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. A stomach flu, or gastroenteritis, which is one of the worst experiences you can potentially go through in your life, in my opinion, is not the flu virus, which, again, the flu virus, as we've mentioned before, is going to be respiratory, but this is still a virus. This is going to cause vomiting, diarrhea, and potentially a low-grade fever. Indigestion, which is eating too fast or eating something very high in fat, possibly also alcohol. Constipation is going to be infrequent bowel movements, and there are so many reasons why constipation might occur. Not consuming enough water, not consuming enough fiber, possibly medications, maybe stress, maybe you just got out of a surgery, who knows, the list goes on and on, but constipation can be like a buildup of fecal matter inside of the colon. This can cause discomfort. Cramping, which is classified as a tightness in the abdomen, again has many causes, but usually a good way to treat it is going to be heat and gas. Gas can also cause a stomach ache, which is going to be just an increased pressure due to trapped gases inside of the intestines. One of the things I kind of want to point out here is that when we say stomach ache, it's not necessarily your stomach that's hurting, it's your intestines. So something a little bit more accurate would be, what is an intestine ache? Most of these things are going to be pain in your intestines and not necessarily your actual organ that is your stomach. Here are 4 gastrointestinal diseases that I want you to know. The first is irritable bowel syndrome. This is going to be IBS. It is abdominal pain, bloating, diarrhea, and constipation. It can be managed via diet, lifestyle, and stress relief, but this is a chronic disease. Ulcerative colitis, or UC, is going to be an inflammation and sores that can develop on the innermost lining of the rectum and colon. This can result in rectal bleeding, abdominal cramps, and an increase of colon cancer, an increased risk of colon cancer. Crohn's is extremely similar to ulcerative colitis, but Crohn's inflammation can occur anywhere in the digestive tract. So a big difference between ulcerative colitis and Crohn's is that ulcerative colitis is going to be lower, and Crohn's can be anywhere. So this is going to be ulcers or sores that can cause bleeding and discomfort. And then last but not least, we have lactose intolerance. This is going to be an inability to digest lactose, which is going to be a type of sugar. Your body does not produce lactase, which is an enzyme that breaks down lactose. So that's kind of a fun little thing to know. And another thing that you should make note of is that none of these things are going to be contagious. Most of them are either genetic or can be induced due to some medications or various things that can occur. Ulcerative colitis is a possible condition that can be caused by taking a medication that is meant for cystic acne. And I won't say the name, just know that it starts with an A. If you know what I'm talking about, great. But it can cause ulcerative colitis. It is known to cause ulcerative colitis. So while you may have better skin, you can develop this condition that will last with you for the rest of your life. All right, moving into one of my favorite examples of a condition that affects the digestive system and can cause death, as well as a very interesting part of our history as humans. In 1854, in London, 600 people died due to an outbreak of this illness called cholera. Cholera itself is a bacteria that causes severe dehydration via diarrhea. There was an investigation put forth by a man named John Snow. Not this John Snow, played by the wonderful Kit Harington, but by a man who eventually became the father of epidemiology, which is a branch of science that deals with incidences and distribution and the control of diseases. What John Snow ended up doing is he went against the scientific community, which had just kind of written off the cholera outbreak as being kind of just sort of a thing that just happened, and that there wasn't necessarily per se a cause, but he wanted to investigate it. What he found is that the houses that were sick formed almost a perfect ring around a well that was used by all of the civilians in that area. Snow ended up removing the bucket and the little crank over on the side of the well so that people would stop using the well. And what he noticed is that people stopped getting sick. He eventually found out that near this well, patient 0 was a little girl who was still in diapers. She had gotten cholera while visiting people outside of this area. And at this time, in London, people would essentially just throw their garbage and waste, whether that was urine or feces, into basically these big cesspits in their basements or in various areas of this particular town. And what happened is that the cholera from this little girl's diapers, from her fecal matter, ended up getting into the water system and into the well. Yes, that does imply that people were eating and drinking basically urine and fecal matter, but that's just sort of how it was at that time. Kind of a cool anomaly that was noted is that there was a brewery just by the well where there was little to no incidence of cholera. And if we were in class, of course, I would ask you guys what you thought of this, and if you thought that maybe this was just a unique condition or something like that. But the answer, so instead of making you wait, is that the workers would drink the beer as opposed to drinking water, so they didn't get sick. Kind of like, and spoiler alert if you've never seen this movie, Cabin Fever, kind of what happened to the one guy in Cabin Fever, if you are familiar with the movie. Alright, pains to look out for. We've talked about appendicitis or a ruptured appendix before. This pain is going to be near the belly button and move to the lower right side of the body, which is where the appendix is. There's also going to be nausea, vomiting, a lowered appetite, fever, and chills. So if you ever have these symptoms, and it's a really intense pain, this could be the sign that you have appendicitis and should absolutely go to a hospital immediately, because if your appendix bursts inside of your abdomen, that could be a very, very bad thing, and it can cause death or sepsis or any array of problems, but it's definitely something that you should be aware of. A gallbladder attack is going to be, of course, in the gallbladder. This is going to be a sharp, sudden upper right abdominal pain and possibly pain between your shoulder blades. This means that there is a blockage of bile and potentially gallstones. Gallstones are going to be crystals of insoluble minerals and salts that form when bile becomes too concentrated. It can end up blocking this common bile duct, and that would be a very bad thing. Again, would need surgery, possibly the gallbladder to be removed, or at least for these gallstones to be removed. Okay, peptic ulcers. We've actually discussed peptic ulcers before at the very beginning of the semester. These are going to form when gastric enzymes and acids erode through the stomach or duodenal lining, so the small intestine. A gastric ulcer is going to be within the stomach wall, and a duodenal ulcer is going to be an ulcer in the duodenum wall. What you will find in these areas is going to be bacterial infections by Helicobacter pylori, and it's responsible for over 80% of peptic ulcers. So if we were to classify these little ulcers here, I want you to think of sores. Again, we have discussed this before with Robin Warren and Barry Marshall. This was the example I gave you for a hypothesis or being formed from a question. Just a little repeat of that, little recap. Again, they found ulcers were always in the presence of Helicobacter pylori. And of course, I believe it was Barry Marshall who consumed a vial of Helicobacter pylori, and of course, he got ulcers. Last but not least, a little bit more to digest. You produce an average of 2 pints of saliva a day. You produce more with a little bit extra to protect your teeth when you throw up. This term borborygmic is the technical term for your stomach growling, which is going to be just juices moving through your intestines, causing that sound. Burping is a release of air and gases from your stomach, and you produce more, obviously, when you are drinking something carbonated because you have that carbonation in your stomach. And to answer the question at the beginning of this lecture, it takes between 2 and 5 days to fully digest food start to finish. Things that can change this potential time is whether or not you are male or female, and also dependent on your diet and your metabolism. If you have a particularly quick metabolism, obviously it's going to take a little bit less time to fully digest a meal, and if you have a slower metabolism, it is going to take more time. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Make great choices.